Okay, so picking up where we left off, we discussed the two prominent economists. Sorry that this thing is going all over the place. Two prominent economists during the early 20th century, F.A. Hayek and John Maynard Keynes. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, became president during this time, and he adhered to Keynesian economics. Once again, Keynes had greater access to academic journals and to people with the ability to make his ideas heard, so his ideas spread rather quickly. FDR never really had to work for much of anything. He was a member of the social elite. He was cousin to Teddy Roosevelt, so that definitely helps in a campaign whenever your cousin was a very well-liked president. But FDR hated businesses. Kind of interesting since he never really had to work for anything, but he hated big businesses. He was rather vague during his presidential campaign. He never really said what he was going to do. He never really made any promises other than promising Americans a quote-unquote New Deal. But what that deal was and what it consisted of, people just generally didn't know. But the New Deal, after he became president, worked itself out into basically becoming a series of economic programs to get people to work and also to get people to spend. There are 3 R's to the New Deal that you should be familiar with: relief, recovery, reform. Put a star next to those, highlight them, whatever you need to do. Relief, recovery, reform. Those are the 3 R's of the New Deal. It was meant to provide relief for the unemployed and the poor. It was meant to offer a recovery, so get the country back to normal. And once again, sort of being birthed out of like the efficiency movement, reform. This was meant to fix the problems in the government, but not just in the government, but all around, in order to stop and prevent further economic declines. As part of this, we see the introduction of alphabet soup agencies, as they've come to be known as. These were federal programs creating jobs, most of them like public works type jobs, and they are labeled by their acronyms. So, for example, the CCC was the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. We used to make jokes about the WPA road down in Evangeline Parish because it's the most horrible road, period. But at the same time, it's a road, so hey, that's cool. There's definitely a question as to how effective the New Deal actually was. Well, as I mentioned earlier with the WPA road, there are roads, there are bridges, there are public buildings and storm drains and sewers and all other sorts of things that are being built, which are really fantastic. When you can improve infrastructure, that's wonderful. There is a small measure of self-respect returning to the heads of household. So is it effective? Well, in some sense, absolutely, because it helps. It sort of helps everyone to sort of plod along and not give up totally. However, there's some problems here too, because FDR ordered millions of livestock and crops to be destroyed in order to help the problem of surplus, of oversupply. So the man who wants to relieve the poor and the hungry, and there are lines of people stretching sometimes for miles waiting to get food. I say for miles, but you know, for just a very long stretch of land. Why are we killing food? And not just killing livestock. and not just tearing crops down. That in and of itself is not a bad thing. Why was it not given to the people? That is sort of the biggest question that I ask. Because in all honesty, it could have done a great deal more to help people in some respects. And then lastly, economically speaking, was it helpful? Was it effective? The national deficit actually increased by at least $6 million. So overall, I think we could say that the New Deal was not effective. But you know, hindsight is 20/20. We can look back and we can make all sorts of judgments, but this seemed to be the best option at the time, at least to FDR. So there you go. Now let's consider other things that are going on. I need you to be aware of these terms as I am defining them to you. Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit, rather than being controlled by the state. Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Communism is a political theory derived from Karl Marx, advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. Sometimes this is referred to as radical or scientific socialism. And then we have fascism. Fascism is a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts the nation, and often a race, above the individual, and that stands for a centralized, autocratic government headed by a dictator, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. If there's any words in there that you're unfamiliar with, I would encourage you to look them up. That way there is no confusion. On the ideological spectrum, we see that fascism and communism are ideologically opposed. But in practice, in many ways, they act the same. In fascism, a free market can exist, and there are ideas of some being superior than others. In communism, everything is supposed to belong to everyone, so everyone is supposed to be on equal footing. However, both require dictatorships to keep the people in check, and neither actually works to build up a nation or its economy. Ultimately, in communism, there is no equality, because you will find that if you are not communist, you are left out. If you are injured in some shape, form, or fashion, then how exactly are you able, whoops, whoa, I'm learning how to zoom in and out, that was fun. Then what exactly are you, should you get in terms of your compensation? So let's go back to Russia. I mentioned before about the revolution and the civil war that took place. We see the rise of the Bolsheviks taking place in the early 20th century. Red is their signature color, giving rise eventually to the Red Scare, the Red Army. They have slogans like bread, peace, and freedom. And if you remember reading the document by Sidney Hook, you'll remember that slogan, don't you? Underneath the Bolshevik communist idea, private property should be completely abolished industries and banks should be nationalized, or the government should have control, and the press needed to be strictly censored. So there is no freedom of speech or freedom of the press. Bolshevik, that word itself actually means majority, even though they were the minority. They were outnumbered. But as time progressed, they grew stronger, and eventually they won the Civil War and won leadership in 1920. Lenin was in control of the Bolshevik Party and therefore the government after the Civil War. In 1921, he implemented the new economic policy in which he allowed some capitalism. According to Karl Marx, there would be a cycle that the world would have to go through in order for full communism to be reached and attained. So with this new economic policy, Lenin basically defended himself in saying that, well, even Marx said that this would need to happen. With communism, and those of you who've had my class before, you have seen this. Seen this story before, but I'm just gonna draw this out for you. So let's talk about our different people that we have here. All right. So let's say we have Farmer A, Farmer B, and Farmer C. Farmer A is a socialist. Farmer B is a communist. And Farmer C is a capitalist. Right? Okay. All of these farmers, they're not just farmers in the sense of they have some land and they grow some crops and all that. Oh no, there are people on their lands that they have to take care of. So kind of like a medieval manor in a way, right? These are all cattle farmers. See? Moo. Moo. All right, all of these guys raise cattle. Farmer A, let's call him Joe, right? Joe. There we go. So Farmer A has some cattle. And in the socialist mindset, we should share and share alike, right? So they milk the cows, they're dairy cows, so they milk the cows and they share the milk and they share the cheese, and life is grand, right? But they are cut off from everyone else. Because anybody who is not going to share and share alike, they don't want to have any contact with. Well, this is kind of a problem, right? Because cows are girls. Bulls and steers are like boy cows, right? So what happens when these cows get old? If you have no interaction with the outside world, if you're closed off completely, well, eventually, it takes a long time, but you end up with a bunch of dead cows, right? Let's look at Farmer B. Let's call Farmer B Sue. Let's make her a girl, right? Girls can be farmers too, dang it. Okay, Farmer B, here's Sue. Sue says, not sure about that. That Farmer A over there, that Joe, he hit on me one time. Not too happy about him. So she takes a more radical approach because the people just had a slow and agonizing death here, right? So Sue also believes in sharing and sharing alike. She saw protein deficiencies and all that sorts of things. So they have a big barbecue. But more quickly than Joe, the cows all die. And with there being no interaction with the outside world, nothing coming in and nothing going out, there's nothing to replenish the land. There's nothing to replenish The herd, nothing. But then we have Farmer C. And let's call Farmer C, make her a girl again. Let's call her Gloria, just for funsies. Now, Gloria says, all those people are just dead and they're hopping the fence to try to get over here to me. So, how do we keep our people from dying? Well, Gloria, also a cattle farmer, decides to sell some cows, buy some bulls, thus making little tiny cows. Thus, Gloria's herd grows. She is not closed off, so she interacts with people on the outside world on a regular basis, right? And they interact with her. And of course, there are people who are hopping the fence from Sue's farm and from Joe's farm, and they're all trying to get over here to Gloria's farm because it's awesome looking, right? Now, Gloria is getting rather rich because she has complete and total control over her farm. She owns the cows. She's helping to take care of the people. So, in this respect, or in this sort of farm case study thing, we see that Gloria's farm is thriving. But does that mean that the people are happy? They're happier than over here in Sue or Joe's farm because they're not dying. Not necessarily. But in unrestrained capitalism, the fat cats get fatter. And there are people down at the bottom who can get left out very, very quickly. So, in thinking about the different economic theories from Hayek and from John Maynard Keynes, that really is the argument that Hayek makes. That capitalism, that free markets would ultimately produce the best results, but it could not be unrestrained, because then we would be right back in, right, the Middle Ages. So, Lenin probably recognized that that his economic policy was not the best. Therefore, he allowed some capitalism in order for Russia to sort of get back on its feet. In 1922, we have the creation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, also called the Soviet Union. Lenin began exerting tighter control through the Communist Party, also known as the proletarian dictatorship, and the Red Terror was used to solidify that control. And this is where we see lots of people dying, being imprisoned, so on and so forth. But before everything could take final shape, we see Lenin dying in 1924. It took several years, but eventually Joseph Stalin reigned supreme and took control. He stopped the NEP, or the New Economic Policy, and he started a campaign to build the Soviet Union into a great power, which included three basic tenets. One, a massive industrialization of Russia. So instead of mobilizing for war, he mobilized the people into industrialization. Collectivization of farms, basically saying that, oh, hey, you were able to purchase this land and this is, your land, quote unquote. Yeah, no, it belongs to the people, and therefore everything on it belongs to the people. Oh, and you're not happy with that? Okay, we're going to purge all disloyalty or dissension. So we're going to ship people off to Siberia, or kill them instantly, imprison them, starve them, all sorts of things, just to make sure that control is held. There's a series of 5-year plans for economic growth, which Stalin implements, which includes a massive public school system in which he wants to increase literacy. He also wants to create loyal young socialists. Because in the public school system, there was sort of a massive brainwashing taking place. Um, and the only thing taught was Marx. There is no freedom, intellectual freedom in communist nations. It is only one way. Then, of course, we have the Stalinist terror. Probably worse than the Red Terror because Stalin lasted longer biologically. You know, he just lived for longer. There were labor camps set up all around Russia for those who were disloyal, who voiced dissension, who were criminals, people just not adhering to communist principles, or people that Stalin and other communist leaders just didn't like. And at these labor camps, you could literally be worked to death. Whole families could go. But we also see mass executions in Russia, sort of in different places. There are mass graves which have been covered up and forgotten by most of the world. Really quite sad. However, it was kind of covered up. Well, not kind of. A lot of the bad stuff was covered up in order to promote the quote-unquote good side of communism. It was referred to as the socialist miracle. Look at Russia. It was this backwater place that didn't end serfdom until the mid-1800s. They plunged into civil war. It was, you know, just a chaotic place, and now look at it. It's fully industrialized. It's one of the leading world powers, yada, yada, yada. And this ultimately gives rise to communist organizations around the globe. So let's take a look at fascism. Fascism, once again, completely ideologically opposed, but looks very similar. So fascist doctrine, we see that the state is everything. There's also sort of a requirement for totalitarian dictatorship. It does allow for some free enterprise and private property, however, it's only for certain people. If you are not of a particular ethnic background or cultural background, then you could be completely removed. The appeal of fascism, one was that it was not communism. Fascists hated communists. But the fascists also, once again, the state is everything, they called for upholding veterans' claims. So veterans are very attracted to fascism. Benito Mussolini was in many ways a walking contradiction. He was the supposed champion of law and order, and yet he would send out the black shirts, his gang of thugs, to go and do his bidding, to start riots, to cause trouble, to cause political turmoil, in order for him to come in as the conquering hero to make things better. 1922 to 1925, Mussolini and others eventually forced the government to hand over power completely to the fascists. And then we have Nazism, which is fascism. Nazism. Adolf Hitler. Austrian by birth, he went to, or tried to go to, art school in Vienna. However, the school rejected his application. He served as a courier in World War I. Although Austrian by birth, he saw his German heritage and connection as being far superior than anything else. And in 1919, he joined the National Socialist German Party, also known as the Nazi Party, and very quickly rose through the ranks to become a charismatic leader. Of course, there were only 7 of them at the time, so if he was the best speaker, then that makes sense. In 1923, Hitler and the Nazis tried to gain power in Germany through force. known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The putsch was very much unsuccessful, and he was arrested and put in prison for a little over a year, in which he wrote Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. In this infamous book, Hitler outlined Nazi doctrine, which, once again, this is part of fascism, so it assaults the democratic tradition, advocates for a dictatorship, nationalism, very, very important, and biological racism is key. So, he learned to hate the Jews in his younger days in Vienna, Austria, and he blamed the Jews and the communists for Germany's loss in World War I. He blames everyone else for Germany's humiliation. And if you're not German, then you are inferior. In 1932, between the Beer Hall Putsch and 1932, so for nearly a decade, Hitler devotes his party and himself to gaining power through legal means. And in 1932, the Nazi Party was the largest in Germany, and ultimately they played off the country's miseries in order to gain support. In 1933, Hitler became chancellor, once again legally, and when he became chancellor, he destroyed his rivals. He destroyed either their reputation or literally destroyed them by way of murder, imprisonment, whatever. He rearmed Germany, which was in complete violation of the Treaty of Versailles, and he also began to persecute the Jews, as well as the mentally handicapped and others who were considered a drain on society. He used the state police as well as propaganda in order to scare voters into voting the people who would support him. In 1934, Germany's president died, making Hitler the sole ruler of Germany. The SS was established to blood purge the Nazi Party, and not long after becoming both president and chancellor, so dictator, the Night of the Long Knives was initiated, and Hitler sent out the SS to kill any of his political rivals, and thus we have the birth of the Third Reich, or the Third Empire. All soldiers were made to swear the Wehrmacht oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. I swear by God this sacred oath, that to the leader of the German Empire and people, Adolf Hitler, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, I shall render unconditional obedience, and that as a brave soldier I shall at times be prepared to give my life for this oath. So they're not pledging loyalty to a document like our military, pledging to defend and uphold the Constitution. They're not pledging their loyalty to a country, but to one person, to Adolf Hitler. In 1935, Germany left the League of Nations, and we see also the Gestapo, or the secret police, being formed. And there is an increase in rooting out undesirables and getting rid of them. Communists, socialists, mixed-race children, prostitutes, alcoholics, all of those people didn't make the cut. Therefore, they were going to be imprisoned, sent to a camp, or killed. The mentally ill, the aged, the handicapped, as well as the incurably ill, so if you had a brain tumor or something like that, they were all euthanized, or what we would say for animals, they were put to sleep or murdered because they're seen as a burden on society. The Jews, of course, probably experienced the worst treatment. I say probably. They experienced the worst treatment at the hands of the Nazis. In 1935, the Jews lost their citizenship in Germany. November 9th, 1938 is remembered as Crystal Night, remembered as such because of all of the broken glass which littered the ground afterwards, as you can see in this image to the top right. In 1939, it was nearly impossible for the Jews to leave Germany. And I've had students question before, like, well, why on earth would Hitler, if he hates them so much, why would he make them stay? And the answer really lies in his desire to wipe them out. If they leave, he can't kill them. Thus we enter onto the road to war. And I'm going to stop here. We'll pick up again